What you're about to hear is a scripture that we read every Christmas Eve. I know because I'm usually the one who reads it. It's a beautiful passage from the Gospel of John that celebrates Jesus as the light of the world, shining into the darkest corners of the earth. I know that in many regards, for many people, this has been an especially difficult year. A brutal presidential campaign, a tough economy, protests and unrests across the globe, unspeakable acts of violence, unspeakable tragedy, and the sorrow of our own losses that are especially close to home. But this passage reminds us that light always overcomes darkness. A reading from the Gospel of John.
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him, not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify to the light, so that all might believe through him. He himself was not the light. He came to testify to the light. The true light, which enlightens everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world came into being through him. Yet the world did not know him. He came to what was his own, and his own people did not accept him. But to all who received him, who believed in his name, he gave power to become children of God, who were born not of blood, or of the will of the flesh, or of the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and lived among us. And we have seen his glory, the glory as of a Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. Hear what the Spirit is saying to the church. Amen.
Searching my memories, I come across this one. I'm 20 years old. Still a student in college. As I skulk down the hallways of one of the university buildings after class late one December evening, I'm not in the best of moods. Christmas is right around the corner, but truth be told, things back home are looking a little grim. After years of uneasy tension, my mother has just finalized her divorce with my stepfather, a man I rather admire. They've sold off the house where I spent the last 10 years of my adolescence. And this past weekend, I returned home from college and numbly threw away the accumulated debris of my teenage years. Posters of 80s heavy metal bands torn off the peeling wallpaper of my bedroom. Worthless comic books tossed in the trash. Old boxes full of G.I. Joe action figures, relegated to a tour of duty in the Salvation Army. I filled up 18 garbage bags with the wreckage of my childhood, loaded up my small two-door hatchback with what was left, and drove off into the sunset. Of course, most of my feelings about all of this are still deeply internalized. I still don't realize how much all of it bothers me, and I'm not even thinking about it as I walk the eerily silent university hallways. All of these anxieties relegated to a locked drawer in the filing cabinets of my subconscious mind. As my footsteps echo across the cold linoleum floor, I stumble on something and nearly fall to the ground. Looking down, I see a strange indentation in the floor that I'd never noticed before, although I've trod these halls 100 times. It's a large, square hatch, camouflaged with the same linoleum tiles as the rest of the floor. Curious, I kneel to the ground and use my dorm room key to pry it open. Applying a little force, the hatch swings free, revealing an inky darkness beneath the halls of the university, a cyclopean abyss of stale air. I don't know if I've stumbled upon a maintenance tunnel or a gateway to hell, or perhaps an emergency exit from this world of divorce and misplaced childhoods, a hidden trapdoor from which to escape the drama of the stage. I close the hatch and go back to my dormitory, but I can't sleep that night. So I return later with nothing but a flashlight, determined to find out just how deep this rabbit hole goes. It's a true story from my younger days, though it could have been the beginning of a movie, or a fairy tale even. A young man, troubled by problems at home, finds refuge in a mysterious portal to another world. It's an old story, after all, told 1,000 times over, a timeless legend of escape. Tired of her mundane existence, the little girl, Alice, flees down the rabbit hole to Wonderland, escaping to a fantasy world of magic and majesty and rather memorable tea parties. Or consider C.S. Lewis' classic novel, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. The young heroes of this book are whisked off from London to an estate in the English countryside so as to escape the threat of Nazi air raids during World War II. Thrust into these odd surroundings, separated from her parents, no doubt fearful for the safety of her father, who's enlisted in the war and fighting in the front lines. The smallest of these children discovers a magical portal in the back of an old wardrobe that leads to the marvelous land of Narnia, a place where she can leave her troubles behind, if only for a little while. And then, of course, there's Dorothy, who lives with her Auntie Em and Uncle Henry and her little dog Toto in the barren plains of the 1930s Kansas Dust Bowl at the height of the Great Depression. It's a gray, colorless world of famine and incessant dust storms that choke everything in their wake. And in the midst of one especially violent tornado, Dorothy is swept away to the land of Oz, a world of vibrant colors where the yellow brick road to a happy ending is clearly demarcated. It's a far cry from the uncertainty of Kansas, where the gray dust blots out every possible future. In essence, these stories are all the same, really. They're all tales of escape from one reality to another. Now, those who lack imagination might suggest that Dorothy only fled to Oz in her mind, in a desperate attempt to escape the poverty of her circumstances. And that's exactly why the characters she encounters there are all caricatures of real people that she really knows. Because Dorothy never actually went anywhere except the depths of her own subconscious. This Freudian theory is especially evident in the film's unofficial sequel, Walt Disney's Return to Oz. In this unsettling 1985 box office disaster, things in Kansas are rather tense. Dorothy keeps on talking about her adventures in Oz, and her dear Auntie Em starts to believe that the poor girl is delusional. So she takes Dorothy to a doctor who barbarically treats her with electroshock therapy. After one of these traumatic sessions, Dorothy finds herself plunged back into her fantasy world of choice, but finds that her happy place is no longer all that happy. Time has not been kind to the land of Oz. Upon her arrival, she finds that the place has become a desolate ruin, overrun by street gangs who roll around on wheels and have circular saws instead of hands. I know you think I'm making this up. I can see it on your faces. But I'm actually quite serious. And I haven't even told you about the Wicked Witch of the North, a demented sorceress who keeps a collection of human heads in display cases as though they were hats. Believe it or not, this film is actually rated G. Though even as a horror aficionado, I have to tell you that I think it makes The Exorcist look like an episode of Leave It to Beaver. In spite of its many flaws and its frankly nightmarish quality, Return to Oz does drive home an important point about these kinds of stories. And that is that none of them are really about escaping reality at all, but rather confronting it head on. These imaginary lands are never as pleasant as they initially seem, and in fact, they're quite dangerous. And that's because the only places these characters ever go is deep inside themselves, where they face their deepest fears and find their courage, just like the cowardly lion. These so-called portals to other worlds in these stories aren't escape routes or exit doors. They aren't a way out of reality, but rather a way in. The tunnel beneath the hatch is black as midnight on a moonless night. The lonely square of light that marks the way I came in slowly recedes behind me as I press onward into the gloom and the murk. The passageway itself is perfectly square, maybe 5 feet wide by 5 feet tall, just short enough that I have to stoop in order to avoid hitting my head on the ceiling. The air in here is stifling, hot, like an old attic on a summer afternoon. A large rusty pipe is embedded in the stone wall to my left, running the course of the tunnel, presumably part of some boiler mechanism that's used to heat the building. I keep my distance from it as I move forward, my flashlight revealing nothing but more darkness up ahead. Having walked for a little while, I suddenly realize that I haven't eaten anything, so I reach into my backpack and pull out a hot dog, lowering myself to the dirt floor for a short break, struggling to open the mustard packets in the feeble light. I'm sweating profusely, but in spite of the tunnel's oppressive atmosphere, something compels me to stay. I'm in no hurry to go back to the surface where all of my troubles lie in wait, ready to ambush me upon my return. Nothing left up there but final exams, a girlfriend who's been avoiding me for the last 2 weeks, and Christmas at my mother's new apartment with fewer people gathered around the tree, half of my family erased from the photograph as though they were never there at all, and no place to call home. On a whim, I turn off the flashlight. Maybe I'll just stay here in the dark, I think to myself. Maybe I'll just stay here. Put down roots. Develop my sense of smell. Begin a new subterranean life. And at that moment, I feel something brush past my leg. And I realize that that's probably a bad idea. This Christmas, I'm sure that there's something that we'd all just as soon hide from. Something that scares us more than we'd care to admit. A fear that compels us to bury our head in the sand or crawl beneath a rock. For many, it's the thought of Christmas without a loved one who's passed away, or the unwanted gift of a bad diagnosis. Maybe it's just the generalized anxiety of the season. And even for those fortunate enough to find peace in their own lives this Christmas, we still find ourselves reeling in shock and terror at things happening elsewhere in the world. The tragedy in Newtown, certainly, but also the looming fiscal cliff and other troubling articles in the news. I'm sure that some people this Advent are hoping that Christ really does come back a second time to clean up the mess that we've made of things. They'll take one look at the news and they'll throw their hands up in despair, find a fallout shelter to hide in, and wait for some higher power to come down here and rescue us. For Jesus to sweep down to earth in his chariot and get us all off of this doomed rock before it's too late. That's what the apocalyptic side of Advent is all about. Whether you're the prophet of some UFO cult who thinks that the mothership is coming to rescue us, or you believe that you're going to be raptured up to heaven as Jesus comes back to earth to judge the living and the dead. Apocalyptic beliefs are all about escaping from this reality to something better. They're all about running away. And according to a recent survey, over 40% of Americans believe that Jesus is coming back to bring about the end times within the next 30 years. On a somewhat related note, there was this Mayan prophecy about the end of the world that came and went this past Friday. Movements like these are all about running away from problems instead of facing them. But that, my friends, is not what Jesus is all about. And it's not what Christmas is all about. Christmas is not an opportunity to escape from this world to some magical land of sugar plum fairies and elves. It's not a time to escape from reality. It's a time to face this reality and to face it with courage. And it's a time to stand beside those who haven't got any courage left. I think it's worth noting that when Jesus came to earth, he didn't organize some mass exodus off of the planet. And I don't think he's about to start now. Jesus was born on this earth and he stayed here. He lived here. He died here. He didn't lead us out of the darkness to the light of some distant star. He brought the light here to us. And that light shines every Christmas morning when we remember and we reflect upon the birth of the Christ child. In his gospel, the evangelist John refers to Jesus as light coming into the world, like a ray of sunshine spilling through the crack of a window caked in dust. And Christmas is all about wiping that dust away and letting that light shine more brilliantly. Sure, there have been a lot of terrible things that happened this year. But there have been a lot of beautiful things too. And most of them we probably know nothing about. There was the story of a couple of parents, for instance, who tattooed insulin pumps on their stomachs to make their diabetic son feel more normal. And other parents who transformed their son's wheelchair into an ice cream truck for Halloween and made him the envy of all his friends. There was also a picture that surfaced that really stayed with me of a brave little boy in Libya who, in the midst of yet another uprising, held up a sign for the cameras that read, "People of America, I am sorry. This is not the behavior of Islam or our prophet. The boy was too young to even spell the words properly, but he had a better grasp of his faith than most, I think. And then, of course, there were the endless tales of selflessness in the wake of Hurricane Sandy, like the doctor who opened up his office to provide free medical care, and the countless people who opened up their homes if only to let total strangers charge their cell phones so they could call loved ones. These people didn't lock their doors. They didn't turn off their lights and hide in the dark. They let them shine. And they let the shadows on the doorstep inside. Now, maybe these relatively trivial incidents can't hold a candle to the horror at Sandy Hook or the rest of the misery that we've looked upon this year. Maybe it's tempting to believe that the darkness is so deep, so vast, that it consumes the light. But consider this. For every episode of suffering that we see on the news, how many compassionate attempts to respond with love go unreported, unnoticed, unseen? Not hundreds, not thousands, but millions every day. And all of these lights together shine incandescent. Together, we carry the fire. And everyone who carries the light of God within them and shares it with someone else adds fuel to the Christ candle that we're going to light tomorrow night. In the words of John, Jesus was the light of all people. That light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. I haven't been in the tunnel for long, but the oppressive darkness is weighing on me. I continue to press onward, though I can't tell you why. I don't know what it is that I hope to find down here in this loathsome dungeon, but I just can't bring myself to go back. After a while, maybe 10 minutes, maybe an hour, I couldn't say, I come across something that stops me in my tracks and freezes my blood, despite the sweltering heat. A couple of things, actually. The first is a perfectly mundane object that seems eerily out of place in this Stygian labyrinth. It's a steel folding chair, rusted with age, standing in the passageway like some ancient throne on a Wagner's Hall of the Mountain King. And sitting upon its surface is what appears to be the desiccated remains of a half-eaten hot dog. Just to be sure, I take a taste. Mustard. And at that moment, I know that I'm not the first to venture into these hallways. Someone else has been here before. Someone like me. A refugee from the world above who had given up hope. Sat in this chair and waited until the darkness swallowed him up. But I also realized then that I'm not like him. I didn't come down here to escape my fear, but rather to confront it. And now I stand at the black heart of its maelstrom. When they sold my house, and I knew that I had nowhere to go back to, I was afraid that I'd get lost in this world. My compass, my center of gravity, my home was gone. I couldn't just click my heels 3 times and say, "There's no place like home." and make everything all right. I was cast adrift on a sunless sea, and so I plunged into its depths, delved into this subterranean catacomb to prove to myself that even in the blackest darkness, I could still find my way back. That I'm not as lost as I feel. With renewed confidence, I turn and run back the way I came, the walls of the tunnel speeding past me in the dying glow of my flashlight. I run, and I run, and I run until finally I reach the light of the world outside, a world that I've found the courage to face again. But I'm not running away. The light at the end of the tunnel isn't an exit, so much as it is an entrance back into the world. And when I reach it, I burst through the floor like a child being born, sweat dripping from my brow like amniotic fluid, my eyes watering in the light. And what could be a better sign of hope than the birth of a child? Amen.